the summer of 1348, the plague reached the walled city of Milan. Across Europe, cities were collapsing. Florence lost perhaps half its population. London's streets filled with carts of the dead. Entire neighborhoods vanished in months. But Milan did something strange. The city authorities ordered 3 houses sealed shut, entire families locked inside, sick and healthy together. Brutal, yes. But the result shocked contemporaries. Milan emerged from the Black Death with far fewer deaths than other major European cities. It did not descend into total chaos. Markets resumed. Guilds continued to function. The city bent, but it did not break. Fast forward nearly 7 centuries. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans. Power grids failed within hours. Water systems collapsed. Hospitals shut down. Grocery stores emptied in days. A modern American city, backed by satellites, computers, and advanced engineering, ceased to function almost overnight. Why did medieval cities, with no electricity, no engines, no digital coordination, so often survive fires, floods, famines, plagues, and sieges, while modern cities shut down the moment centralized systems fail? The answer isn't nostalgia. It's structure, design, and a radically different relationship between people, resources, and risk. Built for failure. Medieval cities were not designed to be efficient. They were designed to survive failure. Walls were thick, streets were narrow, buildings were dense, and neighborhoods were self-contained. From a modern planning perspective, this looks like chaos. In reality, it was redundancy. When one part of the city failed, the rest could still function. Take medieval Paris in the 13th century. The city was divided into parishes, guild quarters, and marketplaces, each with its own wells, ovens, storage cellars, and religious institutions. If a fire destroyed one district, it did not disable the entire city. If a well was contaminated, neighboring wells still operated. There was no single point of failure. Modern cities, by contrast, are optimized for flow. Electricity flows from centralized plants. Water flows from distant reservoirs. Food flows through just-in-time supply chains. Transportation depends on synchronized signals, fuel deliveries, and digital coordination. When one node fails, cascading collapse follows. In medieval cities, failure was assumed. Fires happened constantly. Floods were expected. Sieges were a recurring reality. So cities evolved systems that degraded slowly instead of shutting off instantly. Even buildings reflected this philosophy. Medieval structures were often overbuilt. Stone walls far thicker than structurally necessary. Timber frames designed to flex rather than snap. Roofs steep enough to shed snow and rain without drainage systems. When damage occurred, it was local and repairable. Modern construction often relies on precision. Remove power, climate control, or maintenance, and systems fail rapidly. Elevators stop. HVAC shuts down. Pumps go silent. What looks advanced in normal times becomes fragile under stress. Medieval cities survived disasters not because they were primitive, but because they expected things to go wrong. Local food webs. One of the fastest ways to kill a modern city is to interrupt food delivery. Most major cities today hold 3 to 5 days of food at retail level. After that, shelves empty. Refrigeration requires electricity. Transportation requires fuel. Payment systems require networks. When those systems fail, starvation begins frighteningly quickly. Medieval cities operated on a completely different model. First, food storage was built into the city itself. Grain was the backbone of medieval diets, and grain stores were everywhere. Public granaries, monastery cellars, merchant warehouses, and private homes all held reserves. In cities like Lubeck or Bruges in the 14th century, grain stores were regulated by city councils, precisely to prevent famine during siege or crop failure. Second, medieval cities were surrounded by productive land. Market gardens, vineyards, orchards, and pasture often existed within or just outside city walls. In Paris, historical records show tens of thousands of pigs raised within the city itself during the Middle Ages. Livestock were not hidden away in industrial zones. They were part of daily urban life. Third, medieval people knew how to preserve food without external energy. Drying, salting, smoking, fermenting, pickling. These were not niche skills, but universal knowledge. A household that couldn't preserve food didn't survive winter. When disasters struck, food distribution slowed, but it didn't vanish. Bread might be rationed, meat might disappear. But starvation was not immediate. Modern cities, despite technological abundance, are structurally dependent on continuous external input. Medieval cities were structurally dependent on stored surplus and local production. This difference alone explains why medieval cities could endure months-long sieges, while modern cities panic after a long weekend disruption. Water without power. Water is the second system that fails quickly in modern disasters. Pumps require electricity. Treatment plants require chemicals and sensors. Pressure depends on constant energy input. Once power goes out, clean water becomes scarce within hours. Medieval cities had no pumps. That was their advantage. They relied on gravity, proximity, and redundancy. Wells were everywhere. Private wells, public wells, monastery wells, guild wells. In cities like London or Cologne, archaeological evidence shows hundreds of wells operating simultaneously in medieval periods. Aqueducts, where they existed, were simple gravity-fed systems. If one section collapsed, others still functioned. Water did not travel hundreds of miles through pressurized pipes. It came from nearby sources. Yes, medieval water quality was uneven, but the system itself was resilient. It did not depend on continuous external energy. When earthquakes, fires, or invasions occurred, water access did not vanish instantly. In many medieval cities, rainwater harvesting was standard. Cisterns collected runoff from roofs and courtyards. These cisterns were maintained communally or by households themselves. Modern cities often lack this redundancy. Roof runoff is diverted away. Wells are sealed or banned. Citizens are discouraged from storing water. Everything flows through a centralized system that works beautifully until it doesn't. Medieval cities accepted imperfection in exchange for survival. Social infrastructure. Disaster survival is not just about technology. It is about people. Medieval cities were intensely communal, not because people were kinder, but because survival required cooperation. Guilds regulated trades, trained apprentices, cared for widows, and provided mutual aid. Parishes organized food distribution, medical care, and shelter. Monasteries functioned as hospitals, warehouses, and refugees. When disaster struck, these institutions activated automatically. There was no need to wait for distant authorities. Decision-making was local. Responsibility was shared. During the Great Fire of London in 1666, which destroyed over 13,000 houses, the city did not dissolve into lawless chaos. Why? Because neighborhood structures, guild leadership, and informal networks remained intact. People knew who they depended on and who depended on them. Modern cities rely heavily on professionalized services: police, firefighters, emergency managers. These systems are effective, but brittle. When overwhelmed, citizens often lack the social networks to compensate. In medieval cities, people lived where they worked. They knew their neighbors. Skills were distributed, not centralized. If a blacksmith died, apprentices existed. If a baker fell ill, Another baker lived nearby. This social redundancy mattered as much as physical infrastructure. It allowed cities to reconstitute themselves after shocks instead of waiting for rescue. Slow collapse, not sudden shutdown. Perhaps the most important difference between medieval and modern cities is how they fail. Medieval cities failed slowly. A harvest failed. Bread prices rose. People tightened belts. Guilds intervened. Authorities imposed controls. Hardship increased, but life continued. Even plagues unfolded over months, not hours. Modern cities fail abruptly. Power grids trip in seconds. Communication networks collapse instantly. Automated systems shut down completely when thresholds are crossed. There is little graceful degradation. This is not a moral failure. It is a design choice. Modern systems prioritize efficiency, speed, and scale. Medieval systems prioritized continuity. A medieval city could lose half its population and still function. A modern city can lose electricity for 48 hours and become unlivable. The irony is stark. We have more technology, but less tolerance for disruption. Lessons ignored. It would be foolish to romanticize medieval life. Mortality was high, comfort was low, injustice was common. But resilience was built into the system in ways we have largely abandoned. Medieval cities survived disasters because they were decentralized, redundant, locally supplied, socially cohesive, and designed with failure in mind. Modern cities shut down because they are centralized, optimized, externally dependent, socially fragmented, and designed for uninterrupted operation. The solution is not to return to the Middle Ages. It is to remember what they understood intuitively. Systems that never fail are a fantasy. Systems that fail well are the key to survival. Medieval cities were not strong because they were advanced. They were strong because they were humble. They assumed scarcity. They expected disaster. They embedded resilience into daily life instead of outsourcing it to distant systems. Modern cities, for all their brilliance, often assume stability as a given. When that assumption breaks, so does everything built on top of it. The past does not offer blueprints, but it does offer warnings. Cities that survive are not those with the most technology, but those with the most margin for error.